Hello, and a warm welcome to another session of Ruda Talks Change on the Change Exchange. We're in a slightly different format. This virus makes everything slightly different, but it also makes it possible to reach an audience that we may not otherwise have done. So it's quite exciting as well. And my guest, I'm so looking forward to this interview because as I started looking into Shane Vermooten's background and history and whatever, I just thought this is going to be such an interesting conversation. Shane Vermooten, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Ruda. I hope to live up to your expectations.
You already have with the films you've made. He's a film director. Do you also do ads?
Yes, I've done some smaller commercials, but mainly longer form stuff.
Yes, yes. How did this start? Where did you grow up? What were your dreams? Did you ever think of this when you were a child?
So I grew up in Muizenberg, so I've lived my whole life in Cape Town. And I was thinking about this, and I think there's one instance where I can remember growing up and I thought I wanted to be an architect. But then my drawings are hopeless, like I cannot draw. And my maths is even worse. So luckily that idea of wanting to be an architect didn't live very long. But besides that, the only thing I've ever wanted to be, I can remember ever wanting to be, was a filmmaker. So it's been in my blood. My parents run a production company.
Oh.
And so growing up, I'd either go to set with them or would travel and they'd do overseas jobs and I would go with. I mean, now I look back, it seemed like it was probably just free labor. But it was amazing for me to, at that age growing up, to be on set, to see how things work. And I remember one instance when on a trip, and it was basically going to be the whole of the fourth term, and I'd come back like a week before the fourth term holidays. And my dad went to the principal and said, "Hey, I'm asking you if to take Shane out of school." And the principal said, "No, you can't." So my dad said to him, "Well, let me rephrase. I'm not asking you. I'm telling you that I'm taking him out of school."
How old were you? Which grade were you in?
I must have been in grade 5, grade 6. I think as a result of that, we got to, by the time I'd finished school, I'd seen more than 15 countries. Now I've shot and filmed in over 21 countries around the world. And I think it was just growing up with that worldview was amazing, and it shaped me in such a big way.
And was it always the director's not chair? A director doesn't usually sit down, in my experience.
Yeah.
But the director's role that drew you. You didn't want to. You also write scripts, huh?
Yes, I also write. I actually started out as an editor.
Oh.
For the first 3-4 years, I was editing. And I enjoyed that. I think it helps for a director to obviously understand how a story is put together. But I realized this wasn't, not my personality, because you're, everyone else goes on these amazing trips and experiences these cool things, and you sitting in a dark room and you get all the footage and you're just like, I want to be there. So I still edit some of my own stuff.
And why did they shoot this shot like this? Because I cannot cut it.
I cannot cut it, exactly. So then I think my personality started coming through. I remember, a story with my parents used to tell when we were younger, and a bunch of the older kids would play. I must have been 4 or 5, and a bunch of the older kids were outside playing in the trees. And they just heard this voice shouting, and they went outside. And there I was standing on the ground going, you climb there, you climb to that branch. I think it's just always been part of my personality.
And did you grow up in Media Village, the company?
Yes.
And tell me about that. What is they do courses and train people and all kinds of other things apart from making films.
So I grew up, in Media Village, as you said, and the company has 2 parts. They have a training part, and then they have a production company. So when I finished school, actually, I did my training with them. And then I trained in film and I trained in photography, and they run short. They're basically like 3-month courses. So it's very short. You get the basics, and then the idea is you go out and work. So that's where I started.
And what was the first directing gig? Was it Tula Tula? Was there something before that?
So, a funny story, actually. I suppose the first thing which I can, substantial kind of thing I can remember on my journey is I just finished studying, and a friend came to me and said, hey, there's this competition for Yogi Sip, you know, the yogurt drink, Yogi Sip. And you got to make an advert for them, and you upload it to their website, and then if you win 100,000 Rand. So we're like, well, that's awesome. So we decided, well, if we're going to, we actually were looking for money because we wanted to make a public service announcement for sex trafficking for the Soccer World Cup, which is coming. And so, but we didn't have any money. And so we thought, look, let's make an advert for Yogi Sip. And if we win, we'll take that money and we'll make this public service announcement for the World Cup. So, I mean, I'm enthusiastic. So we went for it, guys, we're going to do it. But we didn't read the guidelines, instructions so well. And turns out it's one of these voting competitions, which everyone hates. Oh, please vote, please vote. And so we thought, no, our plan was what we'll do in the last week, we'll just buy like 1,000 Yogi Sips and we'll vote for ourselves, because you had to buy them, cut off, like inside the lid, there was a code. You'd have to, and so we're like, we'll buy 1,000 in the last week and we'll win the 100,000. After the first week, one of the teams had already 1,000 votes. So we're like, oh, that's not going to work. So we basically came up with a new strategy, and that strategy was every weekend we'd go to different churches in the city and say, like, this is what we want to do with human trafficking. We want to make this commercial. What can you do? Well, you can buy a Yogi Sip. And we found that people weren't voting because it was complicated. So basically this, for 5 months, this is what our Saturday and Sunday was. On Saturday, we'd go to the shop, but because it's a yogurt drink, like, they carry limited stock. So you'd go to Macro and just fill your trolley. Then you'd go to the Pick and Pay and fill your trolley, and people were like, these guys must really like Yogi Sip. Then we would cut them open, the packaging, write all the codes down in a book, and then repackage them. On a Sunday, we'd go to like 4 or 5 church services and sell these yogurt drinks. And we ended up selling 11,000 Yogi Sips. So I probably should have shares in the company. And then that gave us the money to make this human trafficking commercial, which ultimately, but PSA, which got seen by a couple million people over that time. And that ended up springboarding my career and went from one thing to another. And then further down the line, started getting into short films. So,
money is always such a huge problem for filmmakers. It is always the biggest. You can come up with the most amazing ideas, you can put it together, but finding the funding is a huge hassle. How do you, if you had to advise another young person like yourself who wanted to start out, what would you say?
I mean, I would say, when people ask me, they always ask me, well, how do you become a director? Because, I don't have the money and I don't have this. And so I say, well, like that story I just told you, well, we started with selling Yogi Sips. So like, what do you have? What do you have in your hands? If it's a Yogi Sip, sell the Yogi Sip. Oh, I want to shoot on this camera. Oh, shoot on your iPhone. Oh, I don't have an iPhone. Borrow an iPhone. Like, what do you have, and start making it? And I think that's how we kind of started out, was we were just like,
that's often the answer one gets from entrepreneurs is look to what you have, not to what you're dreaming. Start where you are.
Exactly.
But the other very interesting thing about your story is, I mean, your life story and the Yogi Sip story, is the way you think out of the box. When you did Bypass, which is this heart-wrenching movie about organ donation and the traffic in organs, you went out on the streets and just created this huge awareness around it. And you were quite daring in your social media advertising. Tell me that story.
So, when we made, I mean, like you said, I think a lot of entrepreneurs, that's where you start, is what is the problem? And I think a lot of the filmmaking that I do, I come at it with that same, kind of mindset, is what is the problem? And when we looked at the problem, when we made the movie Bypass, it's a medical thriller. And we definitely didn't want it, like, we could make another documentary, but like, really people only watch documentaries unless they're crazy award-winning or they're interested in the topic already. So we're like, how do we, make something people want to see? And so we created this medical thriller, which is, supposed to just be very entertaining. And then bring up more questions if you're interested. And so the issue we looked at is when we looked at the issue of organ trafficking, we're like, of all the forms of organ trafficking, of all the forms of human trafficking, organ trafficking is the kind of the easiest one to solve, because, you know, sex trafficking, it's very complicated, and labor trafficking, there's so many levels. Now, organ trafficking is also complicated, but on the surface level, there's a need for a black market because there's not enough legal organs. And in South Africa at that time, it was 0.02% of our population. Depending on who you ask, that might have gone up to 3% of our population were donors. So we said, well, let's use this film bypass and market it in such a way that we can then encourage people to sign up to become organ donors. So it was a two-part campaign. And the first part was, in the film, our character goes away to a clinic where she gets these legal organs. And so that clinic is called the New Day Clinic. So we said, well, great, let's create the New Day Clinic for real. And so we set up a website, and on there it was prices of organs that you can actually buy. And it was supposed to be very inflammatory. Like the opening line said, why should you suffer in poor health when the poor can be used to suffer for you? Which is, and people were mad about that line. But I was like, the truth is, people with means aren't the one who are selling their organs. It's people who are poor and are vulnerable. So let's be honest with the issue. Let's not sugarcoat it. So we made this website, and we handed out 200 flyers. We made them in Microsoft Word with clip art, cut them skew, you know, like those flyers you have on the side of the road for all those kind of weird medical procedures.
Lost lover.
Yeah, lost lover. Yeah, that kind of stuff. That was definitely our template. And this thing, it exploded. Before we did the campaign, my dad was like, hey, maybe you should speak to a lawyer about this. I was like, I don't need to speak to a lawyer. What's going to happen? The next day, it was on like the newspaper billboard headings, like on the side of the newspaper, organs for sale on the streets of Cape Town. And it is everywhere. Within 10 days, it had 35,000 hits, the website. And every state in America and every province in South Africa had visited this website. And so when I saw how big it was getting, I thought I was having a heart attack. I phoned my dad and was like, can we speak to that lawyer friend of yours? And we went to the lawyer, and he's like, look, it's not illegal. It's maybe frowned upon. So I was like, great, we'll keep going. And that campaign ended up in, once we revealed that it was a hoax, we went to the Kino Kami show and revealed that, oh, this is actually, this is what it's for. But the reality is, well, this may have made some people mad and riled you up. The reality is we need legal organs in South Africa. And the next week, they saw a 40% spike in people signing up to become organ donors from week-on-week growth. So that was quite...
That is such an amazing achievement. But the other thing that struck me and we only have half an hour, so I can't go into everything, but what struck me is that you put your head down and you make things happen. You had lottery money for bypass. It needed to be spent in the same year. So you made this film in a year. Yeah. Previously, you had the Tula Tula one, which is the 168 festival. It's such an interesting concept. 168 hours is 7 days. Oh, 7 days. So you have to make this thing in 7 days. How do you go about that? Is you put your whole team together. You must structure it to the nth degree. And then on day one, 4 o'clock in the morning, everyone's there.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of taking what you've learned from traditional filmmaking when you're not compacting it all into 1 week. And like you say, just compact it down into 1 week. So it's all planned and down to the T. You've obviously, written the script. So you can write the script before that 1 week. So you've written the script and then you've got 1 week to make it. And these time challenges are so fun because often you find some of the best creative ideas come when you kind of throw off the shackles. You're like, I don't have an investor, I don't have producers I have to please. We've got 1 week and we've got people who are passionate to make something, so let's do it. And so that's why I like doing those time competitions, because sometimes, when you get in your head too much on working on a script, you can work on it for months and years and never release it. And I think those time competitions say, well, you've got a week, what can you do? And a
shot can take an hour or 3 days.
Exactly.
depending on what you have. So
Exactly.
if you have an hour, you do it in an hour. Tell me about the 2015, the Mandela Washington Fellowship for Young African Leaders. How did you experience that? And did it shift something in you?
Yeah, so Mandela Washington Fellowship was Obama's kind of flagship African program that he set up while he was in office. And it's this amazing program that took 500 leaders from across the African continent in civic leadership, entrepreneurship, and then nonprofits. So 500 from the whole continent, and you went to the US, spread across universities across the US for 6 weeks. And then the 7th week, you went to Washington, where you had conferences, and then you actually met Obama, and he spoke to us. It was incredible. Mm-hmm. And I think that the biggest thing I took away from that was there's the connections that you make, the networks, because you're now meeting with your friend who's working in government and your other friend who heads up this nonprofit, and just the scope and the way it opens your eyes to different perspectives is incredible.
Have you linked up with some of those people afterward and to get things done?
Yes, so the Cape Town cohort from that year, we're still pretty tight. Some of them have moved to Joburg, but yeah, we chat about ideas all the time and have a WhatsApp group and go back and forth. So that's, I think, for me, that was the biggest thing. I think once if you've got into that program, you've done something pretty substantial already. So there's almost an air of like, there's only so much. I think sometimes South Africans be like, oh, America, they're amazing, they're going to be able to teach us so much. And I think when you get there, realize, no, like everyone got you on merit. Like, and we can take some stuff from them, but what they do is not always better than what we do just because it's America doing it. So I think the experience was incredible, but the most amazing part was just the networks you got to walk away with.
Are you a planner in general? I mean, apart from when you have to make something happen in 7 days, do you have a path set out for yourself, or do you just take the next opportunity?
No, I mean, both me and my wife were chatting about this, and we don't have a plan. We don't have a 5 or 10 year plan. We don't really know what's happening next week, but we just like to say yes to the opportunities that come up, and we like to keep pushing ourselves. So, for example, now end of August we're off to Oxford for a year. So that's
Oxford. What are you going to do?
Bianca, my wife, she's going to go do an MBA. And so, so I'm going along. And even that, that was the longest we've planned in advance. And it happened, and then Corona happened, and there's a stage we're like, we don't know if we're going to be able to go. And we're like, see, this is why we don't plan in advance, because this happens. But yeah, so we're going to be there for the next year. And I think that's like we know where we want to get to, but we don't have, I got a 5-year, 10-year plan. We just
where do you want to get to?
Well, I mean, ultimately our goal is to come back to South Africa once we've been there, and we're hoping to. We've got obviously our production company at the moment, but we're just looking to go get the skills from the UK in terms of different business models that we can bring over from that side and bring here to our productions.
And so make great movies for the rest of your lives.
Yeah, and that's the idea. And I think there's lots of people who have that goal, but a lot of it is not backed up by sound business models. And at the end of the day, it's got to be a business. So part of us and part of Bianca going over this to try figure out sustainable business models for how do we make films sustainably in South Africa that also empower the crews that we work with, because the film industry is actually kind of almost across the board is very much the salaries are very middle class kind of salaries, but to take that step to get into middle class is a big jump, to get the house, to get the car, to move. So the systems we want to set up is how do we help guys, like, yes, they got jobs, but how do we help them like move up that ladder? And just obviously that means the company has to be sustainable and profitable in order to do that. So that's kind of our long-term vision, is setting up a company.
And it's also focusing on almost on life skill training, which is something that fascinates me. But I'll talk to you off camera about that. You tell me about you and Bianca. How did she become part of the team? And when did you know that she was more than a colleague?
So we actually only started working together after we got married.
Oh.
Well, after we started dating. But Bianca's always been around. In fact, at our wedding, we had a photograph of our parents together at her parents' wedding. So some people call it an arranged marriage. Yeah, luckily growing up, in Cape Town, you don't drive further than 10 minutes and say it's far. So I lived in the southern suburbs, she lived in the northern suburbs, so we didn't see each other much growing up. And then one time I went to her house with my mom to drop something off, and then we saw each other and it was like, oh, hello. And then just every day since, we started hanging out, and then it happened. And then since then, we work together. So Bianca works as a producer on the projects, and it's been amazing. I mean, I can't recommend it for everyone, but I think working with your partners, we've been able to travel, we've been able to see the world, and we're talking about the same. Why does for some people they'll kill each other, and for some people they're happily married, they love each other, but they just can't work together. And how does this work for us? And we were saying, we think it's because we have, we've got the same almost objectives, in that we know that this is what we want to do with our lives, and we're kind of on the same path. So occasionally we may disagree, but so one of the vows, for example, we made to each other when we got married is we'll always prioritize experiences over things. Which sounds like a nice romantic thing that you're going to see on Pinterest or something, but we've really stuck to that. So even our tables in our house, we are made from refurbished pallets that we used on our wedding day for decoration, because our intent was we want to spend most of our money and our resources on experiences between the two of us. So traveling, working, making content. And for us, that's been incredible.
And I looked at that wedding video of yours, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And I was thinking, I am very proud of the fact that I've been married for 42 years, but so many marriages end in divorce. What will cement it through the difficult times? What is it that will keep you together?
I think it's, a couple things, and I'm always hesitant because, we've only been married 5 years now. So I'm not be like, oh, look at this guy, I think he's an expert on marriage. But I think it's first of all, our commitment to one another, we're both totally committed to one another. But then I think it's also that our priorities are the same. Your
values also. You call it priorities, but it's also what you see as important. Exactly. The values inside.
And for us, we're very intentional about that. What at this point in our lives do we value, and that may move and that may change. But we'll always prioritize each other and always make time for each other. I think the other thing too is we're very serious about certain issues, but we don't take life very seriously. So we laugh at each other a lot, but we're always laughing. And so it becomes difficult to actually argue or fight because he was laughing at me. But so when it comes to the small issues, we just don't sweat the small things. And we rather keep that, for the big issues.
A colleague of mine, an older colleague, Dennis Beckett, said to me once that the answer to keep a marriage together is never to look for solutions outside of the marriage. It's such an interesting idea that you find the answer to your problem within the relationship. You don't try and see I could be on my own and do X, Y, Z.
And I think that's, I mean, for us, I mean, even working together, it's so, I think we lean on each other so much. Like if I'm stuck with a creative problem and I don't know, does this look good? Is it working? And I can have, 10 people in the room and everyone's saying yes, no, and I don't know. Then all I need to do is look at her and say, like, is this working? And if she says it's working, I'm like, I'm comfortable that's working because she said it's working.
Yeah.
And the other way around, it works both ways. So I think that finding that comfort in each other helps.
You've said that you make your personal space as simple and cost effective as possible. And when you're traveling, how do you retain a kind of a sense of being almost anchored? Because it can get very dear mekaar when one's on the road constantly.
Well, I mean, we just live in an apartment, so luckily it's lock up and go. And for me, I realized, like, after I finished school, before I studied, we went to the States for 6 months and did a program there. And it was 3 months in the US. We went to Israel for 2 months and then back to the US for a month. And the program was amazing, and this amazing, like, spiritual and personal growth. But what I found was you basically got this time to reinvent yourself, because by the time you go through school and high school, you're surrounded with friends and they've kind of painted a picture. This is who Shane is. And so at that stage of my life, I was like, well, I need to change. I need to find people who are going to inspire and encourage and push me to be, to do and be more. And so it made a change then. And I think the nice thing about obviously being married and working together is we travel a lot. So it's not like I'm away and she's here. But I think now, even with going to Oxford, we definitely felt like there's another point in both our lives, and we want to push on to the next level. And while it's uncomfortable, it means literally we're selling everything we have and we're going over to the UK. The only thing we're keeping is our bed, because good beds are hard to find. Selling everything else, and we're moving over because we feel like this is like now a new time, it's a new level. And part of that is being uncomfortable and not really sure where home is, but we know that we're together. So I think that's the key, is that we're together and we're trying to now take it to the next level, which is going to be, it's uprooting our entire lives, it's finding new friends, it's definitely going to be a challenging time. But I think,
what do you look for in friends because as you say, you are quite intentional about this. It's not just the first guy you'd run into in the pub.
Yeah. I think the first thing would be, don't find them in a pub. No, but you may very well. I think for me, there's like a lot of things, and we have obviously different groups. Like we have friends who would just go sit with and and chill, and they have other friends who like, I can go to this person for deep conversation. But for me, and it drives some people crazy, like I read a lot, so especially about what's happening around me. So, I like to be up to date with that stuff. And then I like to discuss that stuff and unpack it and talk about it. And I believe someone with who's thinking should be able to, to have a very strong opinion, to have a conversation with Ruda and go, I'm right and you're wrong. And then you speak to me and go, actually, wait, Ruda's right. I'm wrong. And be able to change. And for some people that frustrates them no end, because they're like, you don't stick to anything. I'm like, no, my thinking on things evolves. And so I like to have those kind of friendships where it's like, hey, we can go and we can, do silly things and go laugh and just have the funnest evening of our lives. But then, the next hour we could be chatting about serious issues and deeply unpacking them and deeply disagreeing with one another. And so for me, I think that's an important thing is, and a lot of my relationships and my friends say to me and they laugh, like, I don't have a relationship so honest with many people. Like, I expect if I do something wrong, you're going to call me out. And if you do something wrong, we're going to, and then we move forward, which is a challenge for a lot of people.
It is.
It is.
Shane, thank you very much. It was absolutely as easy and happy a conversation and insightful as I thought it would be. So thank you. And all the best in Oxford. I hope you enjoy it enormously and you learn lots of stuff and you bring it back to our beautiful Cape Town.
Yeah, it's going to be great. It's going to be cold. And still be, so we leave the end of August. Before we go, we're still fitting in another short film, which we've got to shoot. So we've got a lot to do before we go, but I know it's going to be an amazing trip.
And thank you for downloading this, watching it wherever you are. And do go to YouTube and look at Shane's short films. They are amazing. Tula Tula, Shane, was for me just absolutely beautiful. Thank you for doing that.
Thanks
Go
so much.
well until next time.